Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Committee of the Whole meeting for the City of Geneva. I'm Jim Radecki. I'm an alderman in the 4th Ward, along with my counterpart, Alderman McGowan, who's also a 4th Ward alderman. We welcome you all here tonight for the meeting, and we welcome everybody at home who's tuning in as well. We do have a sign-up sheet today. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone who wants to speak to items B and C. There is a sign-up sheet, so please go ahead and sign up if you haven't already. With that, I think we will move right along to the order of business. Let the record show that all aldermen are present. And that will bring us to item 2, approve the Committee of the Whole minutes from September 11th, 2017. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Marks, second by Swanson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. On to item 3, items of business. Item A, consider special event approval including use of police services, public rights-of-way, and street closures for Ooh La La Chocolate Run 5K on November 5, 2017. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Bruno, seconded by McGowan. Is there anyone here today that would like to speak to this? Hi, welcome.
Hello, I'm Mary Zelmer. This is my husband, Paul.
418 South 6th Street,
Geneva.
Geneva, and we are the organizers of Ooh La La's 5K. We've been at it for how many years now? This is our third year for the...
Third year for the Ooh La La, and this year we had the pleasure of partnering with St. Jude's Research Hospital. So last year we sold out, and we anticipate selling out at 1,100 again this year. So it's a big event, and we're very grateful for the police and the city of Geneva and our wonderful mayor.
Well, we're grateful for you and the police and most everybody too. Yes.
Someone doesn't actually do I don't actually run the race.
No.
Just to clarify.
Yeah, he doesn't do any running. So we also partner with Alan and Esther Roby, Chef Roby, and it's the best chocolate run in Chicagoland, and
It's the best chocolate in Chicagoland too.
it is.
It is.
And so this year we have hotels available. We have a lot of people coming in from Indiana, Wisconsin, so it's really grown. And St. Jude's is really grateful to Geneva.
Any comments from the committee? Any questions? Good luck. Alderman Bruno.
I'll pipe in. It's always a well-run event, so I'm looking forward to the crowds downtown, and I won't be running. I could run as a control group.
Well, he is our turnaround spot, so Mike is involved as well with turning runners around.
But good luck. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Burkhart.
Mary, I know this is a great event. Hi, Paul, but do you still have room available for this year if people want to register this year?
Yes, we're
how
about
can they do
halfway
that?
sold out already, and we anticipate that, weeks before we haven't started advertising. Our big push in Chicago will go out right after the Chicago Marathon, and then we'll probably see a big boost. And then 2 weeks before with our social media campaign, and all of our signage will go up next week. So then we anticipate it'll really pick up steam.
So if Geneva area residents want to participate, they can get on
Yes.
early and go
Yep,
ahead and
and it'll
get
be
registered.
in Glancer, and it's in Kane County Chronicle. So residents will know, and there'll be yard signs. So we will make sure anybody in Geneva that wants to run gets to run. In fact, they've already been notified 2 months ago, and we're given priority. Anyone who ran last year or the year before.
Great. All right. Hope you have great weather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So too.
Anybody else? Well, on behalf of the City Council, thank you all very much for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
On to item B, consider draft ordinance rezoning 401 North First Street from the R6 medium density 2 and 3 family residential district to the R7 multiple family residential district, CMM Holdings LLC. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Marks.
Second.
Seconded by Cummings. Discussion, any questions, comments from the dais? Alderman Bruno.
Well, these comments will probably relate to both B and C, but I didn't want this to go unacknowledged here, changing from R6 to the PUD. And I'll probably save some of these comments to the particular application, or to the item C. The property, we're looking to create a PUD here. Right now,
Mike, could you please speak up there?
oh, I'm sorry. Should look at my microphone. There's, the applicant has to earn a PUD from us, so I think we should be looking at this from that perspective. You know, R6 to R7, we are looking for density. I'm hesitant to, well, what will become apparent from my future comments is I'm hesitant to rezone this at present. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the dais? Any questions for staff? Alderman Burkhart.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions for David DeGroot.
Good evening.
Thanks, David. Is there anything you want to say to open this? We don't have a presentation on this tonight. It feels like a pretty big development in terms of with the
I mean,
rooftop decks, but
I guess just a general overview is the property is currently zoned R6, which allows for single-family, two-family, and then up to three-family dwelling units. The maximum building height in that district is 35 feet. Side yards are 6 feet, and the street yard setback is 20 feet. The applicant's requesting to rezone that to the R7 district to allow for more than 3 attached units, in this case 5. The lot as it sits could likely accommodate a division and probably two buildings, a 2-unit building and a 3-unit building within the R6 parameters. So the density is not really increasing from the proposed, or from the existing zoning to the proposed. The building height that's proposed does exceed the 35 feet. From the First Street side, it would be 36 feet and a few inches, and then from the back side of the building, facing the river, it would be 45 feet, but that's really accommodating the stairwell to the rooftop deck. To the top of the parapet wall, I think is still around that 36-foot mark.
and all of these are going to have an elevator shaft that would be enclosed in some kind of greenhouse rooftop deck?
Right, into the greenhouse structure that would bring you really to the center of the rooftop, but then the habitable deck portion would be towards the east side, towards the river side.
And will all of them have operating elevators? Is that the plan, or?
I believe that's the case, right? Yes. Yes?
Yes, okay, all right. So Ms. Daryl Woods wrote all of us, I think all of us got an email from her. She's a resident at 721 North First Street, and she said she has some familiarity with rooftop decks, and I thought she raised some good questions. I told David I'd be kind of bringing these up tonight, so I'm not catching him off guard. But, you know, Daryl said she has a condo in Chicago, which a rooftop deck, and she has has familiarity with another unit. She feels like they're kind of unique. Do we have any kind of rooftop decks in Geneva currently? Anything similar to this that's being proposed?
Residentially, not that I can think of off the top of my head. Not that I can think of.
I can't think
And we
of
don't have
anything,
any regulations that are specific to rooftops. I know that was one of the comments too.
Yeah, so she says, what safety measures are in place to prevent a child or an adult from falling off the roofs? Does this, you know, I guess I'm struggling with this, how it's designed up top. I mean, would it be possible for somebody to fall off the roof?
Well, we have a minimum barricade or railing height of 36 inches to keep people from falling over.
And that would be all around each unit individually?
All around the rooftop deck areas.
Okay. she asked what city guidelines or regulations are in place to protect pedestrians or vehicular traffic below from any objects blowing off these roofs, flying off the roofs. Are we hopeful that, I mean, people will have heavy enough lawn furniture or that they'll take it inside, or?
Well, I guess
concern?
regarding like lawn furniture, we don't have regulations on weights or anything, but I think the deck areas, again, are set back on the river side of the building, and are not close to the public right-of-way of First Street or Stevens Street. I guess the one corner, the southern unit, could be a little closer to Stevens Street. But I think just in any other scenario, whether it's across the street at Park Place and you've got furniture on the balconies, you're going to take measures to make sure that they're secured.
Will barbecue grills or grilling be permitted on the deck?
As long as the building is either sprinkled or there is a 2-hour fire separation in between the units, then that would be permitted.
And let's see, what hours will the row home owners be permitted to use their roof decks?
We don't have any
Right.
regulations on hours of use, but we do have our noise ordinance that's in place that controls the noise at the property line, as it's measured at the property line, after the hours of 10 p.m.
Those are just some good questions I thought she asked and I wanted to hear about. Can we talk about the transition zoning? That bothers me a bit with this. So it should be 25 feet to be going from an R6 to R7, and they're asking for about 22 feet, is that right?
Right.
On
So
the north side?
anytime we have an R7 zone property that allows for 4 units and above, that requires a transitional yard if it's adjacent to a single-family zoning district, which we have in this case. That transitional yard is required to be 25 feet deep and to be heavily planted to create kind of a transition and a screen. In this case, the yard that's proposed is 21 feet and some change, but it is still proposed to be heavily landscaped. That was originally, I think, at around 16 and a half feet, but after the first Plan Commission public hearing, they recommended that the whole building be pushed a little farther south to increase that separation and to more align the building on Stevens Street with the buildings across the street at Park Place and to the east, the single-family homes to the east.
Very good. All right, that'll take care of me now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Bruno.
I believe I misspoke earlier. This is not a PUD, is that correct? This is just asking for
The item
zoning
that's
with a variance.
on the floor now is just to rezone the property from R6 to R7. The next item on the agenda would be the planned unit development.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else from the dais? Alderman McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, David, I'd actually like to ask you a question. And I'm probably not going to use the most accurate terminology for this, but I think we've all kind of heard some people are in favor of this planned building, some are opposed. And some people are citing, I guess, planning studies and then showing in specific, ways how changing the zoning for this location kind of goes against what's written in our plans. However, I've also heard the other side that higher density housing is something that's been planned all along for this area. So I'm not sure which one I don't mean to say the word believe, but I don't know who to listen to.
Well, the 2003 comprehensive plan, and I can pull those plans up and we can look at them if we need to, but the 2003 comprehensive plan did designate this as a site that could have potential for attached single-family housing, such as townhomes or senior housing. It did also speak to preserving the single-family character of neighborhoods north of the downtown area. That area that's being described is kind of outlined on that map as everything kind of north of Hamilton and south of Stevens. But I think the general principle there can also apply to that residential neighborhood across from Wheeler Park, those single-family homes, because those are showed as staying single-family too. And then when we did the downtown master plan in 2012, this was again identified as a site that could accommodate some density, and there was actually an illustrative concept plan put together that showed row homes in this configuration on the site.
And if I may also ask you, David, I've heard you say that you like when the city sticks to the plan. But it seems like you may be advocating for this plan, which goes against, now we're asking for, or the developer is asking for a change in the zoning. So I feel like I'm getting mixed messages from your department. I apologize for my bluntness here, but
No.
I just want to know.
So the city's adopted planning policies are kind of our guideline moving forward. And you go through a planning process to kind of set the vision, set the goals that you want to attain as a community, not as a planning department, but as a community. We had several public meetings, and those plans were reviewed and approved by the commission and the council. So I advocate for those plans on behalf of the city. So once we have those plans in place, we try to align our zoning regulations to implement those plans, to remove barriers that stand in the way of that vision. So in this case, it's my belief that using the PUD tool would help implement the plan that the city's adopted to allow townhomes on this site. Does that make sense?
It does. So just to clarify, you don't feel that it's a problem to change the zoning for this location?
Under the zoning districts we have in place, it's necessary if that is the vision we would like to see on that property.
Okay, well, I think for me, this is a tough decision to make, so. Not to say that you haven't been helpful. Thank you, David.
Alderman Kilberg?
David, could you just do a comparison as it relates to Park Place? Obviously, we went through this process with Park Place about 3 years ago.
Right.
Could you just point out the similarities and the differences? Are there any differences, really? The
Yeah.
path that we're on here?
Yeah, well, it's a similar process. Park Place, we had to amend the comprehensive plan too to kind of expand that concept to the whole block, so that's not present here. We're not changing the comprehensive plan. But in terms of the product itself, Park Place has about a 10 to 12 foot setback off of First Street, where this building is proposed at 20 feet, which is the minimum requirement of the zoning district.
Okay.
Park Place has a maximum height kind of at the peak ridge of the roof line of, I think, like 38 and a half feet or 38.2. What's proposed here from the First Street side, it would be 36 feet and like 2 inches to the top of the parapet wall. But I think, oh no, I'm sorry, that's to the top of the greenhouse structure. To the top of the parapet, I think it's more like 26 and a half or thereabouts. So I think the overall mass of the building on First Street won't feel as much as Park Place does. And then again, the setback relief that's proposed on Stevens Street is to increase that setback to the single-family home to the north and to kind of align the building with Park Place across the street and the homes along Stevens Street.
It seems that with the council's action, it's related to Park Place. It did initiate a redevelopment of this area down a path that has already been established now with Park Place. And you're saying, really, we're not looking at a changing of the comprehensive plan. We're not looking at any variances that are anything much different than with Park Place. Actually, they're less. Are there any variances that they're asking for here again? Could you redefine those again?
The variances that are proposed are for the building height to increase to a maximum of 45 feet, but that's as it's measured on the back side of the property as it slopes
Okay.
towards the river. From the First Street side, it's 36 feet and I think 2 inches, which is shorter than Park Place. And then the setback relief that's proposed is only along the Stevens Street side and to reduce that transition setback to the north by a few feet.
Have we had any objections from the owners of Park Place at this point?
From the owners of Park Place, they have not either provided that in writing or come to the Plan Commission meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Alderman Ruby.
David, I just want to confirm, you said the lot is big enough that the builder could do like a 2-unit and a separate 3-unit? So they would still have the 5-unit development. I assume it's financially advantageous to do it as one?
Well, you could potentially split the lot into 2, and sketching out kind of the models that they have, this 5-unit building, you could definitely get 2 2-unit buildings
Okay.
with that model, but you could also do 1 2-unit building and then maybe a stacked 3-unit building instead of side-by-side units.
Okay.
That would get you to the same density, but
Okay.
2 buildings, and then you would reduce the setback to the north from the 20 feet that's proposed down to 6 feet.
Okay. So I guess what I'm thinking is they could accomplish the same density without any zoning changes.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Well,
But to that point, could you clarify some of the setbacks and some of the differences between R6 and R7, if it remains as R6?
yes. So R6 and R7 both require a 20-foot street yard setback. So along First Street and Stevens Street, that setback is 20 feet in both districts. In R6, the setback to the property to the north, that side yard setback is 6 feet, and that's the existing setback requirement. What's proposed in the PUD, the R7 district would require 25 feet, but what's proposed in the PUD is 21 feet. So still greater than the R6
So
district.
going to R7 gives potentially 15 more feet of relief or thereabouts on that one property line.
Correct. And I think, I don't think I've spoken to density in the districts. The R6 district requires, I think it's 3,250 square feet per dwelling unit, where the R7 district requires 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit. So the increase in density based on this lot size is maybe 1 unit, but with the PUD tool, you can control that density to stay the same.
Alderman Bruno.
Thanks for the third swing at the bat if no one else wants to go ahead of me.
I'll go after you.
I just want to come back to that R6 versus R7, irrespective of the plan. We're looking at, just at least on paper, 19 more feet of buffer between R7 and single family versus R6 and single family. Well, it seems a lot better for the transition, again, irrespective of the final project. That's it. Thanks.
Alderman Cummings.
I'm cautiously optimistic about this. I would like to see increased density. I think this is very close to what we were imagining a number of years ago. And I'm excited about the idea. At what point does the city drill down a little bit and get into some of the safety requirements? I have a place downtown. I was there this morning and measured the balcony railing, and it's 42 inches. I'm guessing that at some point we could, rather than reinventing the wheel, look to best practice and what other cities do. Our building also lets grills appear on the balconies, but the grills have to be gas rather than charcoal because embers blow and we're 20 stories up and who knows how far they'd go. And I think this might be kind of and I love the idea of anything roof, anything outdoors I love. I would be very reticent to start having time requirements that somebody could be on their outside deck. I would compare that to somebody saying I can't be on my patio for beyond a certain point. That's why we have the noise ordinance things. But maybe this will be a nice opportunity as we move along to look at things like balcony railing height within the PUD, or if they're HOA forms, what sort of grill can be up on the second story of a frame building, things like that. But overall, I'm cautiously optimistic about this and would like to see the density. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Maladra.
Like Alderman Cummings, I'm cautiously optimistic. The only thing that I'm puzzled by, David, is, so the way that we've described our plans, the comprehensive plan and the downtown master plan to get additional density, townhomes or whatever, we could accomplish that with R6 just as readily as we could with R7. So I'm just looking at the zoning change, and it sounds like the zoning change is a lot more agreeable because of this PUD that we're going to do. So my question is, why are we voting on the zoning change before we've decided we're going to go ahead with the PUD?
Well,
Which makes the zoning change more palatable.
we try to align the underlying zoning with the standards that the project would be built to. So in this case, it more closely aligns with R7 than it would R6. So that's the reason we rezone properties and also do a PUD, is to try to more closely align the underlying zoning with the PUD.
I get that, but why don't we decide first if we're going to go ahead with the PUD, and then, because that, how do I put it? I like the things you said about increasing the setback on the north, even though it's less setback than the R7 district requires. I don't know necessarily that if this PUD doesn't go in, that I'd be comfortable with something that does go in that doesn't have these certain amenities associated with it. So is it even possible to do the PUD first, see if that gets by, and then talk about zoning?
When
or
you're
not?
applying for the PUD, you're applying for that within a zoning district.
Say that again?
When you apply for a PUD, you're applying for that
Oh,
within
within
a
the
zoning
zoning
district.
district.
So
Alright,
the
good.
zoning has to come first, but it's part of the reason we
Got it.
process these things concurrently, so we
Yeah.
can kind of have the testimony and the discussion as a whole
Okay,
and act on them consecutively.
Yep. thanks.
Any other comments?
David, you have the comprehensive plan.
Microphone, Rich?
Yeah, Mike?
Sorry, Mayor. Does that show what the zoning is all around the building right now, what the potential is or not?
The comprehensive plan went in, but it should be in our staff report.
Yeah, I was just looking in there. So it looks like the north is R6, the south is R6, the east is R6, and the west is R7, because the west then is Park Place, correct?
Correct.
And R6 is single-family residence to the north, but it's still R6 zone because it was an existing piece of property. I guess that's,
That's correct. And the R6 district does allow for single family. It allows for single family, two family, and three family.
okay.
So that could be converted to a 2-unit building.
So to the south, which is across Stevens Street, correct?
Correct. Here.
And that is actually right now a duplex itself, correct? Or what is, I can't remember. I drove over there this weekend and now I'm a little confused. It's zoned R6.
It's zoned R6.
The land use is a duplex right now, it says. Is that correct?
Should be. I'm trying to picture that unit.
I'm trying to picture it too, and I'm sorry.
I think we've got that listed in the report too.
Yeah, it is. I'm right there. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So everything around it except for Park Place is R6 currently,
Right.
pretty much. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to
Well,
make
and
sure.
I guess as you go a few lots north,
Yeah, but I mean, the subject property right surrounding it is all currently zoned R6. And that came from the comprehensive plan, or was that always that way, I guess is my...
well, with the exception of Park Place, the zoning that's there has been in place since '95.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, David. We'll take comments from the audience now. If I mispronounce your name, please correct me. Miles Milner? Here. Please come forward and state your name and your address for us.
Miles Muehlner, 417 North First Street. Good evening, everyone. How are you? Hopefully good. I know we all want to get home, watch the Monday Night Football and check our fantasy, so I'll be pretty brief here. This property, well, a little bit by myself. I just moved here in March. I came from Elmhurst. Elmhurst is a very urban, closer to the city of Chicago suburb. Rented out my house. I found Geneva. I actually grew up here. I'm one of those guys that always said I'm never moving back home. Sure enough, I moved back home here. So I figured I'd settle down, start a family. This is where I wanted to be. I see this development as fundamentally changing the neighborhood. On the east side of 31 First Street, it's primarily single-family homes, with exception to maybe one or two duplexes. This development, it's not just looking for rezoning from R6 to R7. They're also looking for a hybrid on the setbacks as well as the height variances. So R7, you should have 25 feet setback from the property, as well as they're looking for this special height addendum or whatever to have a party deck on there. David, no offense, you kind of throw out there almost as a threat in the last two meetings that, well, if they keep the current zoning, they could be 6 feet off my property line. I'd welcome it. I look to my neighbors to the north here. They have a 2-flat. It's directly to the north of me, maybe 6 feet off the property line. Just what R6 calls for. No special height variances. It doesn't diminish, it doesn't dwarf my building, doesn't dwarf the building to the north of it. It fits the neighborhood. What I think the big case here isn't just my property. I think a lot of the concessions in the last couple meetings we've been part of have been in respect to my property, which I'm grateful for, but stepping back and looking at the neighborhood as a whole, I think it's a precedent of what's going to happen next. You know, I wasn't here when Park Place got passed, but I think that set up this development project. And if this one goes through, what's next? A couple of my neighbors have good-sized lots. I mean, what's holding them back from selling to another developer? At some point, are you going to want to protect these single-family homes? Or are you just going to want to turn it into a Riverview axis of multi-high-rises with party decks and price out the young people moving here? I think there is a lot of safety concerns as well. I invite any of you, if you want, come over, park your car on my drive at 4 o'clock, try to pull out backwards at 5 o'clock, rush hour. You're not going to be able to. There's a good chance you're going to get sideswiped, hit. You put a massive building there blocking some view access, it is a hazard. There's a lot of issues here that they did not answer, especially with the rooftop decks. I think if you are going to pass it to R7, I mean, you stick within the confines of 25-foot setback, no special allotment for the height variances. I really hope you guys take this into consideration. Thank you.
Elfie Knox. Okay, thank you, Ms. Knox. Linda Mazer.
Sadly, I'm not going to be as brief as Miles. My name is Linda Mazer, and I live at 513 North First Street. Good evening, Mayor Burns, aldermen. I think I have to say something right up front because I'm bursting at the seams before I read my prepared notes. I really resent using, and I think it's the wrong thing to do, is use R7 as our example. First of all, there's not a person in the neighborhood that supported that. We supported R6. You know, people like to say, oh, they don't want change. We did. We didn't want R7, and I find it ironic that Mr. DeGroot said, well, it won't be as massive. Well, that's not exactly a positive thing. And we are a neighborhood, and you cannot look just to what is to the left and what is to the right. You can't do that because your comprehensive plan really encourages you not to do so. So with that, I'm now going to bore you with my letter here. I would like to start with a refresher of the definition of zoning according to the definition from zoning law, a legal reference. Zoning ordinances must be reasonable based on all factors involved. such as the need of the municipality, the purpose of lifting restrictions, location, size, and physical characteristics of the land, the character of the neighborhood, and its effect on the value of surrounding properties. The rationale behind zoning is that it promotes the good of the entire community in accordance with your comprehensive plan and zoning plan. Zoning laws aim to ensure that a lot or a new building in the vicinity be in coherence with the area, thus protecting the public interests of existing neighborhoods and prevent overcrowding. It must enact the regulations in accordance with a well-considered comprehensive plan intended to avoid arbitrary exercise of governmental power. Now, on to the next item. I would like to address, many of you asked it, regarding your very own comprehensive plan. You can look this up. It's on page 4.5 regarding residential area. There are 2 points here that I would like to point out. One of the points is maintain the scale, quality, and character of the existing single-family neighborhoods. I don't see where this plan does. I don't see where Park Place did. Protect residential areas from encroachment of incompatible use. To be effective, this is also the third point, the comprehensive plan must respond to the expressed values and desires of the community. I'm not making this up. This is in the comprehensive plan. And to go on to page 3.2, and this is a direct quote from the comprehensive plan titled Goals and Objectives, under Community and Appearance. Ensure that new development and redevelopment complements and reinforces the existing desired character of the community. Maintain the attractive tree-lined streets, pedestrian scale, and other distinguishing qualities of Geneva's existing residential neighborhoods. And point 8 in there is continue to improve and enhance the community gateways through the use of special signage, landscaping, and other entry design features. It is indisputable that North First Street is a gateway to the city of Geneva. Do you envision North First Street being lined with massive buildings in relationship to lot size, with very little green space? This does not seem to align with the comprehensive plan, nor, in my opinion, does it seem welcoming. Now I would bring to your attention the city's description right here under R6 when they describe what R6 is. And it is a quote, let's see, from 11-581. R6 medium density 2 and 3 family residential district is intended for low to moderate density housing and to protect them from incompatible uses. And I find this very telling. The District R6 is specifically intended for older, developed areas of the community. It says nothing of that sort under R7. At one time, the property in question was zoned R1 and I've lived here 40 years, and was changed to R6. Our R1 neighborhood consists of 24 homes and families, and also included in our neighborhood, but not presently zoned R1, is a lovely 2-family townhouse next to Miles' beautiful home. This brings the total to 26 in our older neighborhood. To my knowledge, all but 2 homes are built on much larger R1 lots than the average Geneva R1 lot. We take great pride in our neighborhood, and unlike you, we want to preserve the character and protect our financial investment. Within 2 to 3 years' time, our neighborhood is now entertaining yet another higher density zoning request with variances. It is exhausting. This same neighborhood and others stood before you, these same neighbors and others stood before you and objected to the zoning change for Park Place. Again, our objection was not building a Park Place, not providing diversification and multiple family. It was R7, the density, the immensity, and again, R7 also changes the character. There's a big difference between a 2-family dwelling and a 5. even if they're only taking up the same space. Between a 2 and a 3, there is a big difference. If you grant this request, what reason will you give for not granting all the others? It becomes a snowball effect, and I already heard you say, some of you say, well, we did it across the street. I do not feel any of the R6 should be increased, as it is a better fit according to our comprehensive plan. If you continue to grant zoning changes and variances without substantiating the need, addressing the guidelines, definitions, and ignoring the impacted neighbors, what message does this send to our neighborhood, existing neighborhoods, potential home buyers, remodelers, and developers? In the review submitted by staff regarding this development, they state this development is consistent with existing uses and zoning of property within the general area, with the exception of Park Place, which is not contiguous to R1 neighborhood and was opposed by the neighbors. Could you please give me examples of how this is consistent with existing uses in the neighborhood, because I don't see it. I am also greatly concerned about the traffic congestion, especially if you continue with R7, not only for our neighborhood, but the intersection of 31 and 38. You cannot ignore the fact that within 5-block radius, there are almost 3 full blocks, unbuilt blocks, awaiting R6 approval from you. And there are also existing condominiums, businesses, proposed PUD business, Riverwalk, all bordered by State Street, North Avenue, Route 31, and River Lane. All of the traffic must ingress and egress via Route 31 or Route 38. To my knowledge, no traffic study has been done regarding the overall build-out of this area. I don't even know how you would evaluate it if you're going to zone them R7 with variances. I implore you not to look at this development with myopic vision. I have been to meetings for both this development and Park Place, and despite the many questions asked by the community about the zoning change itself, I have never heard a response. I'm sorry, I'm so dry. I've never heard a response from either the Plan Commission nor aldermen. Now, that with the exception of tonight, I'm talking about prior. Zoning changes are dependent on using the guidelines written in the comprehensive plan. This is not an option, it's a fact. I believe the comprehensive plan took a minimum of 18 months and probably more like 3 years of work, money, and input from the community, the expertise of many individuals in many walks of life. Their plan suggested R6. And please, I beg of you, I'm not a mean person, do not misconstrue the following question as disrespectful. With sincerity, I ask you, why are we spending taxpayers' money on a comprehensive plan if the Plan Commission and aldermen are going to continue to grant higher density with variations without substitution? I'm almost done. We live in a city, and Mayor Burns, you might have to correct me, it's been a long time, with a council manager government. The zoning decisions are not determined by department heads and their staff, nor the mayor. The decision is made by the aldermen, who in return represent their constituents, their community, and they live in the city. The character of Geneva from State Street going north to the St. Charles border rests solely on you. Because you are a legislative elected officials, when you vote this evening, if you vote in favor of the rezoning, I respectfully request, and I feel all of us deserve to hear your explanation for doing so. I requested the same of the Plan Commission prior to their vote, and no one responded with an answer. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank you for your service. And now I'll just give you a little lighthearted chuckle. Feel free to laugh. I wanted to introduce you to our neighborhood because I bet most of you don't really know it. By this, you're going to see I'm not a drawer, not an architect, but when you were talking about property, and when I talked about the snowball effect, I know you're all dying to see this. Over here is the R1 neighborhood. So this is North First Street or Route 31. This is the area that your comprehensive plan is encouraging to stay single family, okay? So that's all of this. Here's Wheeler Park. Here's the R7 approval. Oh, don't you want to see the picture?
I'd like both, yeah.
Okay, so here's Wheeler Park
There you
that you approved.
Miles.
Oh, thanks, Miles. Okay, so here's North First Street. These are the R6 areas you have not approved yet. All of this from Peyton. This is Ford Street. This is the area in question tonight. Again, here's Park Place for reference. This goes like that. Here's Miles. Here's the lovely townhouse. And here's R1 single family, starting with 1 home, 2 homes. Down here, of course, were single family homes that are rentals. And actually, even though I've heard it say they're in not the greatest condition, maybe they're not, but they're cute people that live down there and have little gardens and they rent. Now, the other thing I don't think you've considered is North Street is your cutoff point for R6. Do you know there's actually an R1 single family ranch home back here? It was a lovely home that was always maintained. A few years back, an investor purchased this home. He has every right to do that with the intent to develop. And I know this for a fact because he approached I'm not done yet, but because he approached my husband and I to purchase property, which of course we said no. So you've got this, you've got Chodine's condos here, you've got the brewing or bottling company here, which I don't know if that'll be in the zoning map. I think it's zoned B6, and who knows? I mean, I could see somebody putting in for a zoning change there. B6, State Street. Now, this is not to scale. I mean, I divided this evenly, but from that point forward, so I'll hold this one up, Miles. To give you an idea, if you put 2 of these up, this would pretty much be scaled to the St. Charles border. That's our neighborhood. I just thought you might want to see it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Janet Kraft. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I live at 727 North First Street, and I think I sent every one of you a copy of my remarks. But I was really focusing on the whole concept of neighborhood that really grabbed me at the Plan Commission meetings. I don't think I can outdo Linda at all on that. You know, I put in my remarks, and I do have a copy of it for you, that I oppose granting the requesting zone and variances on the property. And as far as a lot of the technical details, I'm not going to address those, except Daryl Woods, I read her material on the rooftop deck. And I do have to say, if any of you have ever experienced having a toddler and 3 feet, one of my toddlers could get up on top, at the age of 15 months, could get up on top of the counter and then refrigerator. So I think you really ought to take the safety thing very seriously about the height and the materials that are used. What really caused me to speak at the Plan Commission sort of extemporaneously at the last one was that the word neighborhood was used, I think, very loosely in the developer's presentation and also in rebuttal to the citizen testimony. The Park Place townhouse development across North First Street was used to justify, that was sort of the benchmark for everything else we're talking about. They were used to justify variances and zoning changes in the name of neighborhood congruency. And I found that just really disheartening, and if not inaccurate. The home adjacent to the proposed row houses, Miles' home, is one of the old neighborhood to the north, including my 1988 home. And this whole exercise, I used the word wary to the Plan Commission. It just made me, I had an experience, or we had an experience in 2009, which I called Ancient History. But it was really reminiscent of that. We were notified, the residents of the 24 properties to the north of Miles, that they wanted to change our home from R1 to R3 to eliminate non-conforming zoning status on some of them. Well, you know, the homeowners were upset. I certainly was, and gave very strenuous opposition. But we were very glad that a way out was found. Text amendments were developed to address just the issues of those non-conforming properties. And I did put a little footnote. You know, I'm not sure why this came up in the first place, because it was found that there were several hundred, I think close to 500, non-conforming properties in the city of Geneva that were, could be dealt with in some other way than to change the zoning. So, I don't like to feel this way about city commissions and so forth. I was a school board member one time, so I know how much of your time this takes for all of you. So I can really appreciate that. But anyway, we were really concerned. Our big concern was that all of our 24 properties would be susceptible to future zoning changes if a blanket R3 at that point was given. And it just seemed very reminiscent to me. You know, it ended well, but our current concerns weren't unfounded, because it's really clear now that what we're discussing is not this corner property to be developed, but we're discussing Park Place as the benchmark of, why not? And it certainly has made the surrounding property susceptible for a project with more of the same. So I'd like to say that I don't have concern about the ongoing effect, but I do. But again, thank you, and thank you, Linda. That was very, very informative.
Thank you.
What do I do? Do I give this to Recording
Sure, please
Secretary?
do.
Or?
Thank you. Well said. Next, we have Daryl Woods, but hi.
Hello. My throat is a little dry. I wanted to thank Alderman Burkhart for acknowledging the material that I sent. We all take safety seriously, but I want to thank you. And I wanted to before I start, I've sent my comments to everyone, so I'm not going to read everything. There are a couple of things that I wanted to highlight, and I wanted to answer a question. Alderman Kilberg asked if the owners of Park Place, the owners of the Park Place units had offered any objections. Well, there aren't any owners yet to object. The last homes to be built in the Park Place complex are the units that are on First Street, and those are just now being sold. And in fact, Linda and I went to view a unit because we wanted to see what a person in Park Place would see when they looked out of their top floor window. And the salesperson is very much aware of the proposed First Street row homes. And I won't tell you what she said, but she is trying to move very quickly to sell the units before they break ground. I live at 721 North First Street, and I live in a single-family home. I live in one of the single-family homes that's across from Wheeler Park, and we are a neighborhood. I feel that in this whole discussion, we're forgotten. Because the neighborhood has been defined, as everyone before me has said, the neighborhood has been defined as Park Place, the homes that are south of Stevens, and the homes that would be to the east of this proposed project. But anything that happens on First Street north of Stevens would definitely affect us. And if this rooftop deck is not done correctly, I think a rooftop deck at this location is problematic by virtue of the fact that you have a very busy street and it's on a corner lot, and there would be 5 contiguous rooftop decks. The other problem is that the city doesn't have any guidelines, and a rooftop deck is different from a patio or a deck that's on a first level. I looked at, and I'm not an engineer, but I'm just speaking from my own experience and what I've learned through some reading, but Chicago has a lot of experience with decks because the Wrigleyville area, people have rooftop decks. And I'm not sure what year it was, but there was a horrible accident where a back deck collapsed with people on it. And it turns out that the reason it collapsed was because a rooftop deck was put on that building and the proper engineering was done. Now, these people are engineers, but what concerned me when I was at the public hearings was that the rooftop deck and the greenhouse type structure still seem to be very fuzzy in terms of exactly what they're going to do. You know, whether they're going to have a heated greenhouse, if it's going to be a working greenhouse, whether there's going to be gardening. It seems that things are going to depend upon what the individual owners want. And it makes it hard for the community to know what's going to come in, and I also think it makes it hard to know what kind of guidelines and regulations need to be in place. The other thing that I was going to say was, given the fact that Geneva itself doesn't have guidelines or regulations, there's no way for this city to control or regulate what people put on top of their roof. The apartment that I rent in the condo building, the rooftop deck, there are guidelines for the use of the deck that are posted. And those guidelines are based on the municipal code. But if there isn't any kind of code, how would a homeowners association or even an individual owner know what's safe or what's not safe? To give an example, in the condo building that that I have the apartment in, there is a guardrail. I'm short, and so I'm estimating, I didn't measure the guardrail, but the guardrail is, I'd say probably, it's taller than I am. And that's because there are adults, there are children, there are teenagers, there are a lot of people who are using that deck, and so it's high. I also think that that's probably based upon what the code specifies. In the apartment that I vacation in, the apartment complex, there's a parapet wall, and it's taller than 3.66 feet. I mean, it's, again, I'm short, but I know that it's taller than I am. And that's because, again, you have a variety of people that are using it. And people also drink on decks. The one in Chicago, you can't drink. I mean, alcohol is forbidden, but where I vacation, people do drink. And so you have to have safety measures in place. So I was a little, like I said, I was a little disconcerted that at the lack of guidelines and safety measures in the materials presented to date for the First Street row homes. That alarmed me. Again, and I said it here, with all due respect to the Plan Commission, I don't feel that the developer nor the staff review fully vetted the unique problems and challenges of roof decks in residential settings. And this is important because these decks have been described as living spaces. People entertain on decks, people have parties on decks, people exercise on decks. They do a lot of different types of activities. I talked about the guardrail. In terms of objects falling from the roof, we had I don't want that point to really be sort of minimized. We had a storm in April, and we're on the river, and we have a deck, and we have furniture that is, I think it's wrought iron, I'm not sure what it is, but it's very heavy. And I've lived in Geneva since 2003, and through all the storms, we've never had that furniture move. Well, in April, I was sitting in the kitchen, and I saw our chairs were all up against the railing. And storm was pretty bad, and I said something to my husband because I went to look, and then he said, "Oh, it's nothing, everything's okay." So I went back to look, and we have like a large table with an umbrella on it, and the wind had turned that table over. Now this table is heavy, it's really heavy, and the wind was carrying it across the deck to where the stairs were. And there's no way the table could go down the steps because there's a door there. But imagine if that were a rooftop and we're sitting in our kitchen. We wouldn't even be aware that the furniture was moving. And if there wasn't a sufficient barrier, it could end up over on the street. So, and I've noticed this year we've had some bad rainstorms there because the trees have really taken a beating in the park. The other thing about a barbecue deck, again, I'm not an engineer, but I know that some cities don't permit barbecue grills on rooftop decks, but they permit them on a regular deck because of the fire hazard. And also, we're on the river, there are trees. That's a concern. With respect to the hours of operation for a deck, the deck that I use in the city is open from 9 until 10, and and we can use it from May until October. I'm not suggesting it be from May to October, but what I did state was that there are decks, there are elevated decks in the downtown area attached to restaurants. And maybe it's because of the liquor law or what have you, but those decks are not open all night. We have a stable residential neighborhood, and I would hope that the standards would not be more permissive than what's permitted in downtown. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up. I mean to talk so long. I'm going to ask the same thing of you that I asked of the Planning Commission, to really consider the wisdom of approving 5 contiguous rooftop decks on 5 attached row homes on a corner on a high-traffic road. And I will tell you, I'm a walker. I do a lot of walking. And so I take very seriously the fact that something could very well hit me as I'm walking, or something hitting a car. Thank you. And I'd like to give I have my comments, if I could submit those. Thank you.
Thank you. Kent? Let's see. Did I pronounce that right?
Hi, my name is Kent Utsey. I'm at 721 North First Street, and I'm normally not that dismissive of my wife. I wouldn't get away with it if I was. I'm here because I wasn't terribly happy with what happened at the Plan Commission. And I'm not just talking about the outcome. I'm talking about the fact that I didn't hear a lot of impartiality from Mr. DeGroot and the staff. And I think that you guys have been given some bad information. And so I want to kind of hit the reset button, particularly with regard to the staff analysis, because that kind of set the stage for a whole bunch of different conclusions that I think are factually very much in error. Now, one of the points that I tried to make at the Plan Commission meeting is that they say that the proposed use is consistent with other uses in the general area. And I kind of stopped them and I questioned them at that point in time. Like, what do you mean by the general area? What does a general area mean? And then I started kind of getting into the point that there's a difference between a general area and a neighborhood. And that basically, when they try and equate everything back to the concept of a general area, they're using the wrong measuring stick. And I'll give you an example here. So let's think about Mill Creek. Okay, now it's true that condos exist within that general area. There's no doubt there are condos in that general area. So having a condo in Mill Creek definitely passes the general area test. But if you were to propose putting in an R7 condo next door to one of those single-family dwellings in, say, the Tana neighborhood, the homeowners would go absolutely ballistic. It wouldn't pass the neighborhood test. Yeah, there are condos in the general area, but absolutely not in the particular neighborhoods in question. So it's absurd to argue that just because a use exists in a general area, that it's automatically appropriate for a given neighborhood. That's simply not the truth. You have to use the right kind of measuring stick. So let's talk about our neighborhood. And I don't think up until recently people have really stopped to consider North First Street as being a neighborhood, but it is, and it's a very unique neighborhood. And it's not Park Place condos. Okay. Park Place condos is an anomaly, in that whole section of town. There's nothing else like it, and then, hopefully there won't ever be. But it's that line of homes, and they're mostly single family and a few duplexes, that extends north of the river from Stevens on up. We really don't think about south of Stevens as being part of the neighborhood because
it just doesn't fit with the character of the rest of the neighborhood. Everybody kind of knows that that's going to be, multifamily, and everybody kind of accepts the possibility that that's going to get zoned up, and there's going to be more intensive use there. But the neighborhood that's north of Stevens is what we're talking about. And most of it is single-family homes, a few duplexes, and most of it is riverfront property. We paid a lot of money to live there. It's a neighborhood that's unlike any other in Geneva. We've got the houses going along, single family, and a couple of duplexes, and we've got Wheeler Park, and there's nothing else like it. And like I said, we chose it for a reason, and we pay a lot of money to live there. We pay a lot of money in taxes to live there. It's an identifiable neighborhood, and you can't minimize that. So just as it would be absolutely ridiculous to put a condo over in the Tana neighborhood of Mill Creek, well, it's equally ridiculous to think about putting a condo in our neighborhood. Of course we're going to object. Of course we're going to go ballistic. So, let's think about this in terms of the neighborhood, because the neighborhood is a real entity. It's a real, it exists. So if you go back to the staff analysis, everything is couched in terms of the general area. Okay, everything is, does this fit within the general area? But as soon as you get rid of that bogus the bogus notion and start thinking in terms of the neighborhood, everything starts falling apart in that staff analysis. And like page 4, the first item is wrong. The requested R7 district zoning is consistent. No, it's not. It's not consistent with the adjacent property to the north or any other property in the neighborhood that extends both north and south on the east side of First Street. It's not consistent. Page 4, number 2 is equally wrong. They say the requested R7 district zoning is, consistent with the neighborhood. No, it's not. It's not consistent with any other existing zoning classification of property within that neighborhood. There's no other property with which it's consistent in that neighborhood. And then page 5, number 4, and I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but rezoning from R6 to R7 is in fact a deviation from the comprehensive plan for Geneva. And you can wax eloquent about, it might be better to go R6, or R7 as opposed to R6, but that doesn't address the fact that it's still a deviation. It doesn't fit with the comprehensive plan. And the one that I find particularly irksome is, they're saying that there's no harm to adjacent properties. But in the Plan Commission, we had real estate professionals who came out and said flat out that the proposed development is likely to inflict substantial harm to the value of the adjacent properties, especially to those in the north. Okay, this is not a matter of uninformed opinion, and it's not certainly a self-serving opinion. It's a statement of fact. If you put a great big huge condo next to a single family home, it's going to whack the value of the single family home. It's ipso facto. It's common sense. The next thing is, the location, size, and height of the proposed building and other structures may adversely affect the use of adjacent properties. I mean, there's no denying the fact that that if you put a large building, a building of that magnitude, next to single-family homes or on, a residential street like that, it's going to have an adverse impact on the use of that property. I mean, there's a very good chance that Miles would be living in permashade. They talk about the building's not that tall from the front. Well, that's fine if you live on the sidewalk. But if you happen to enjoy going out into your backyard, then you're going to be in permashade. I mean, it's just absurd. So there's more, but you get the point. I mean, the main point that I want to hit with regard to this zoning, this analysis that was done by the staff, is of the 9 special use standards that the Plan Commission is supposed to use, this proposal fails on 4 of them. Okay, it fails on 4 out of 9. It's an inconsistent use, it's inconsistent with zoning, it deviates from the comprehensive plan, and it's likely to do harm to adjacent properties. So this is not an application that can be legitimately approved based on the factual evidence. You know, you're right, they have to earn this. And the point that I tried to make at the Plan Commission, and I'm trying to make tonight, is that they haven't earned it. You know, there's substantial evidence that this is going to inflict harm. It's not going to be a good thing. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the way that this is brought to the neighborhood. And, you know, you got to understand, we're all heavily invested in our homes. You know, they're important to us. And like I said before, our neighborhood is unlike any other in Geneva, and we really like it. Now, had Hogan come to the neighborhood and said, hey, I'd like to do something over here on this vacant lot, what do you think? I mean, we don't necessarily want to have a vacant lot there, and we'd like to have something there too. Vacant lot's sort of an eyesore, and of course everybody's concerned about what's going to be put on it. Well, if he'd come to us, we're reasonable people, and I'm sure that we would have been able to work out a win-win with him. But that's not the way it went down. He cooked up a way to make as much money as he possibly could, putting as much building on the lot as he possibly could, without any thought to how it might affect the neighbors. And he started jamming it through the city. And when we started yelling, he couldn't even be bothered to personally attend the meetings and talk with us and address these concerns. Now, to me, that doesn't signal either business acumen or a very high degree of responsibility to the neighborhood. I mean, these guys, you know, they come in and they build and they sell and they're gone. And they're leaving us to hold the bag. So I think it's kind of high-handed and arrogant. It's not the way that I would do business. And in fact, you know, a few years ago, is Joe still here? Yeah, I mean, Joe Stanton's my neighbor, and he wanted to do some things with his property. And he was a real upright guy. He came over and said, Kent, you know, I'd like to kind of do this and that with the property. And, you know, we sat down and talked about it and said, well, you know, I'd really kind of like for you to get rid of that little shed that's in the back. And he said, okay, cool. And so we worked out a win-win. And I came in here with Joe and I said, yeah, this is going to affect my property because it's on my property line, but we got a win-win. Let's do this thing. And it worked fine. That's not the way this happened. So he did the wrong thing. And I don't think he should be rewarded for it. So anyway, going forward, I think the right thing to do is let's reject this proposal and give everyone a chance to work out a win-win. You know, we don't want a vacant lot. You know, we're open to multifamily. We want to win for Hogan and we want to win for the neighborhood. But if you pass a thing now, there's no way for that to happen. I mean, all negotiation ends when you pass this. So all I'm saying is just like, put it aside, let's go back to the table, give us a chance to talk with Hogan and see if we can figure out a win-win before we proceed. And in the future, the city really needs to make sure that developers at least have a preliminary discussion with the neighbors. You know, if they had had a preliminary discussion with the neighborhood, we wouldn't even be here. You know, we would have been able to work out some kind of accommodation where they could get what they want and we could get what we want. So, you know, if we kind of set that as being a standard for developer behavior in the city of Geneva, you're going to eliminate a lot of drama for the city and for the Planning Commission. You know, if you focus in on, you know, getting developers to talk with the neighbors and working out a win-win on the front end, then everybody's going to be better off. I think that's essentially it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the dais, or I'm sorry, from the audience? Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Anais Bowering, and I live at 312 North 5th Street. So I apologize, I'm a little late to the party. I haven't been to previous meetings about this, but I do live in, I guess, what I would call both the neighborhood and the general area. And I think in contrast to some of the other comments tonight, I just wanted to put forward that as a member of this community and fairly adjacent to this proposed development area, I personally support this. I think it sounds like a really interesting project. And given that there is a need for and support for increased density, I'm sort of surprised that there's so much opposition. But I know that change can be unsettling, and people care very much about where they live. Personally, I really think that increased density is beneficial to the city at large, but also to our neighborhood. We have a bunch of small businesses in the area, and I know that having more families adjacent seems likely to only help them out, and it's in my interest not only to have more people have access to the things I have access to, but for those businesses to be viable, which means they need customers. Again, this is an area that's close to downtown, it's close to parks, it's close to the river. I personally would like to see it enjoyed by as many people as can fit. It strikes me that this is a fairly technical change between from R6 to R7, given that there's a difference of maybe 1 unit if this change wasn't granted. So I guess I'm a little surprised that there's such vehement objection to it, since it sounds like there are a number of concessions, or at least thought that's going into making it fit in well enough with the neighborhood. In addition to Park Place, I'm struck by the fact that just a block, depending on how you count blocks, either 1 block or 2 blocks away, there's another set of buildings that is, I assume, also R7. It's not quite on the diagram included in the packet for tonight. So I guess in my mind, this is part of how Geneva changes and evolves and continues to make itself available to people of varying different backgrounds, and I hope there would be some affordability considerations included here. I know that can be difficult. I heard from my neighbors that there's concerns both about a development like this pricing people out of their homes or out of Geneva, and also diminishing home values. So obviously that's something that people care a lot about. But I guess I feel like this looks like an interesting development. There are still some issues potentially to be worked out, but I guess I just wanted to be on the record that there is support for this project in the neighborhood as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience? Back to the dais. Anybody from the dais? Alderman Maladra.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for their comments. And one of the biggest being that you expect from us an explanation of why we think the way we do. So I'll offer my explanation of why I think the way I do. Try not to laugh. So the context that I used when looking at this issue was, in fact, our planning documents, specifically the comprehensive land use plan that Linda was referring to. As I look at that plan, and I was going through it here to find the specific pages, I see call for, well, so first I should take a step back. The comprehensive land use plan is a living document. It's not static. It's not cast in stone. At one time, it had Pepper Valley as farmland. At one time, west of Western Avenue was wilderness, and we all know that it's not that way anymore, and so change happens. It's the framework within which we would like that change to take place. The current framework, being the comprehensive plan, actually in a number of places calls out the possibility of multifamily residential housing. I think that part of the reason for that is this recognition that demographics are changing, times are changing, and demand for this type of housing is going to increase. But as it relates to this development in particular, I would draw attention to a couple of things. Linda referred to page 4.5. A point that I took from that page where it refers to multifamily opportunities in specific. It says areas near the Fox River where we can take advantage of developable parcels, which this is, scenic settings, which this has, and proximity to downtown, which this has. On the next physical page of the comprehensive plan, there is a map, a land use map, on which it looks to me as if this specific area is noted with an item number 5 containing the same language, multifamily near the Fox River, et cetera, et cetera. So the proposal, I believe, is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So then I was thinking about areas where we have this type of mixed housing. Park Place is the obvious one, and you guys have all noted that. I didn't think of Mill Creek, but I did think of Pepper Valley. As a matter of fact, Pepper Valley has townhomes, which are zoned R7, and apartments, which are also zoned R7, immediately proximate to single-family homes. I do not think that the Pepper Valley neighborhood has suffered from that proximity, nor do I necessarily think that the North First Street neighborhood will suffer from a change to this parcel. I would agree with Aeneas, change is difficult, but change can't be stopped. It can only hopefully be channeled in a way that the change is beneficial to the neighbors, the neighborhood, and the greater Geneva community. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you if this is going to be good, if it's going to be bad. I can't tell you if the developer is going to profit. I can't tell you if your property values are going to be threatened. Oh, one other thing that I do want to comment on. Sometimes it bothers me when we hold the developer accountable because he's just trying to profit, but all we're trying to do is protect the resale value of our home. Sooner or later, the money is on the table for both sides. So it's kind of an issue that is moot. And so I look at the effect on quality of life. Kent and Miles, the point about permashade, that's a good one. And I would ask David to tell me about the possibilities of that. The points about regulations for rooftop decks, those seem like good points as well, but we can develop regulations for rooftop decks. And if we had those regulations, would you then find this property or this proposal objectionable? And on what grounds would we look at there? The issues of traffic and visibility from turning, I believe we've already looked into that, and the engineers think it's fine. I'm not an engineer, so I have to defer to somebody who knows about that. So to me, at the end of the day, we have a proposal that fits within our planning documents, fits within the spirit and intent of the Homes for a Changing Region that this council adopted a few years ago, and is consistent with the fact that Geneva's been changing for 100 and some years and will continue to change. And that's my context. Thanks.
Thank you. Alderman Cummings?
I said in the beginning I was cautiously optimistic about this. I am still cautiously optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will be able to find a viable, profitable, attractive development, keeping this in the R6 district, zoning district. I don't remember your names, and I apologize for that. I was struck and moved by your comments. I think that our planning document is correct in looking for medium density here, more than single family. We have it to the north, R6. We have it to the south, have it to the east, and we have R7 to the west. R7's the anomaly. I think we could come up with a very attractive development, keeping it R6. I do want to mention that back to deck spaces, I believe the deck spaces are going to be private property. The common areas, I have this in my building in Chicago too, the common areas, absolutely, they close down at 10 or 11 o'clock. I'm in a building with a bunch of 30-year-olds or 25-year-olds. I can't imagine what it would be like if there weren't hours restricting the common area usage. But restrict hours on a privately owned deck? No, I would be dead set against that. Safety, yes. Would love to see railing, all the things that we're going to go through anyway. I look forward to seeing that. Again, I'm not in favor of rezoning. I think that the zoning that is there as R6 enables the developer to come up with a multifamily project that is well received by the neighbors with some collaboration, profitable for everybody, and attractive for the city of Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Ruby.
Just to add to that, I also would like to see a proposal in R6, and in hopes that that would appease everybody. I worry that you're still going to have a lot of the same concerns, or some of the same concerns anyway, but I would like to at least have the developer propose something within the R6 guidelines and take a look at that rather than just approving this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alderman Bruno, would you like to talk about the triangulation of permashade?
Yes, I was.
We had a conversation before the meeting, so.
Microphone. Yeah, let me start over since I'm not on, I didn't have my microphone on. It's come up several times with permashade. I think the discussion is really best for the next item, but since it came up, I did want to address that. That's a mathematical question. And I did that math, and at the height of summer, the shadow of that building would be fully on this property. At the height of winter, it would cast shadow over Mr. Molnar's southernmost addition. All told, there would be about 4 months of shadow that might peek over his windowsill or higher on the very south addition. I just wanted to jump in with that because it was brought up. Thank you.
Sorry, Mike, can you clarify, say your first part? I think you mistake. You're saying that there would not be shade at the summer from this building onto the neighboring?
The shade would be entirely on the First Street row home property.
Gotcha, thanks.
Any other comments?
Excuse me, one clarification. I was using the midpoint of the building. There is a significant slope to the property. I didn't do analysis for the entire length, but I used the closest portion of Mr. Molnar's property to the midpoint of the proposed development. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments from the dais? Yes, Alderman McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have representatives from CMM Holdings here this evening? If I may ask you a question.
Would you guys please approach the dais so we can
Okay.
capture your response?
Dan Marshall, Marshall Architects.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Well, I actually had this question earlier, and so just, stop me if I am asking this too soon in the meeting, but what is the, what would be your anticipated sales dates for and build out for these row homes? Would you sell them, do you already have potential buyers, or would you sell these like one at a time and then build them kind of one at a time, or would you build all 5 of these row homes at once and then go and like sell them?
As the architect, I'm not really in control of that, but I would presume that the shell will be built all at once, the foundation will be built at once, the walls will be built. The build-outs may wait till the buyers come in so they can customize the insides of them, but the outsides would be all built at once.
And that's correct? Okay, and I guess for the record, you know, I've known Brian Hogan personally. I just want to give you my opinion of his character, which is that I think he's a great person. He's a Geneva resident. So a comment was made earlier that the developers come and they, you know, maybe, I'm paraphrasing here, but put up whatever they want and then they disappear. Brian wouldn't do that. He lives here. He has roots in this town. So I don't think you would experience that. And I know that the work that Hogan Design does is impeccable. And thank you, I don't have any further questions for you. But I do want to share that I feel we need to stay within the existing zoning for this property. I'm not in favor of the variances that are being requested, and I just want to work within the existing zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Alderman Swanson.
I just wanted to state that I feel density is important to add to the downtown. I think this is an opportunity site which has been identified as additional density, and this is an opportunity that we could add to that. It's a small site within the neighborhood, and I don't think that we're going to see a very different scenario if we stay with the R6 and not approve the R7. So I support the project as it's proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, seeing no other further comments, I just want to reread the motion that's on the table that's already been, it's been motioned and seconded. And that is to consider a draft ordinance rezoning 401 North State Street, or North First Street, from the R6 medium density 2 and 3 family residential district to the R7 multiple family residential district, CMM Holdings LLC. Okay, and I believe we'll take a roll call on that.
Mike Bruno?
Nay.
Tara Burkhardt?
Nay.
Donald Cummings?
Nay.
Becky Ruby?
Nay.
Dean Kilburg?
Aye.
Craig Maladra?
Aye.
Richard Marks?
Aye.
Jean McGowan?
Nay.
Jim Radecki?
Aye.
Robert Swanson?
Aye.
We have a tie.
We have a tie, 5-5.
In the event of a tie, ladies and gentlemen, the mayor gets to vote, and it's my belief that nothing should be killed at a committee of the whole meeting, but we should provide this opportunity to again consider discussion. Therefore, I will vote aye in order to advance this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries 6-5. Alderman Ruby.
I just want to clarify for everyone here, nothing has happened. Can you explain the?
Right. Yeah, oh, sure, the committee of
you.
the whole is recommending.
Just the zoning, yeah.
First of all, it is just the
Nothing
zoning.
is official.
And of course, the committee of the whole is a recommending body. The action that we take today is not binding. It goes forward to the full city council, and that will be next Monday. So you are correct. Okay, moving on. Item C, consider draft ordinance granting a preliminary final plan unit development plan approval for First Street Row Home, CMM Holdings LLC. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Marks, second by Swanson. Comments from the dais. Alderman Marks.
I guess, David, this is the question for you. Is this where we can deal with some of the concerns regarding those rooftops? Or where, what, I mean, the zoning really wasn't to handle. I mean, I think there are some legitimate concerns here with some of the rooftops in and the height of the railings and stuff I mean, I think we need to at least have, is this the place where we have that?
Yeah,
or-
the PUD gives us the ability to put some additional conditions on the project if we feel it's necessary. Regarding the height of railings and the use of barbecue grills, some of the reason we didn't focus on that at the Plan Commission level or even at the staff level is because the petition is really related to zoning and the bulk regulations, the use of the property, setbacks, building height, and not those fine details. And those details are addressed in the International Building Code, International Fire Code, with our local amendments. So we do have some minimum railing height requirements. We do have some minimum noise standards for use of residential property in the evening hours and those sorts of things. So if we feel the need to go beyond what we already have in those adopted codes, I guess now would be.
Well, I guess my other question would come into play is, if we ever do go back and do change that code, because we do see that there are some concerns that come, would that be automatically apply to this site, or would it be grandfathered in that we could not? How does that work, is my question.
Typically, you're grandfathered in until you do additional work, let's say on the rooftop. If they came in for a permit to make changes to the rooftop, they'd have to be brought up to the current code.
But as it would stand then it would just...
It would be
could
under
stay-
the current
it would be under-
regulations.
But if the international code did, or code did change that the railings have to be higher, if they ever replace those railings, they would have to go to that height
Right,
at that
and
point.
I mean, I'm not a licensed architect, so I
Neither
don't
am
want
I.
to pretend to be, but I believe the standard is 36 inches if it's considered a residential building, or 42 inches if it's commercial. And there's some back and forth occurring between the architect and the building division now to determine whether or not it's going to be considered
No.
IRC or IBC.
That was my question. What is it really going to be considered?
It has to do with the way the building is measured with the surrounding grade, and we're working through that, but it'll be held to one of those standards.
But if the council or the committee of the whole wanted it to be used as the commercial standards, we could add that in now, correct or not?
Do we know what it's designed to now, Dan?
It's designed for residential.
To 36.
And it's 36 inches above the roof, paving of the roof right now. And it's a solid parapet wall.
Could you come up to the microphone? I think some people would like to hear this, so I apologize.
Thank you. Currently, these roof decks are divided by, they've got solid parapet walls on on 3 sides of them, and then the greenhouse and a railing keeping you from going on the rest of the roof. So it's really just the south part of the roof. And each one of them is isolated, about 23 feet square by a 3-foot solid parapet wall. So people will not be able to see stuff on the roof deck. The only side that we remove that from on the request of the Plan Commission is on the north side. We pulled that deck 5 feet from the edge, and we reduced the parapet wall to try to, and I don't know if you figured that into your zoning, we reduced that parapet wall down a couple of feet to lower the building at that point. We'd be glad to add it back in, but that's what was passed through the Plan Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman McGowan.
Thank you. One of my reservations about this project, I've seen the building plans. I love this building, but in addition to me not being in favor of changing the zoning to accommodate this project, I think that 3 feet is not nearly high enough. The developer here would have to give a monetary contribution to the Geneva School District. That's an indication that children could be living in these row homes, certainly, even if it was age restricted to like a senior citizen population, they would have grandchildren visiting. And a 3-foot ledge or whatever it's called is just an invitation for children to climb on it. And there's nothing on the other side except to run around and fall off the side of the building. So that is a huge concern for me. And I don't care what the regulation is. My common sense says that children would climb over that, or a drunk person would climb over it, or a stupid person would climb over it and then fall. Okay, so please, do you have something to add to that?
36 inches is the railing height that's on every railing on your house right now. All your railings on your second floor, on your stair are all 36 inches. All the decks that we do in Geneva, all 36 inches. Even if they're a full story out of the ground, it's 36 inches. The balconies on the 7th Street townhomes are 36 inches. It's not a short distance that's dangerous. To boot, a lot of railings have horizontal bars that kids can stand on. As a solid parapet wall, it'll be difficult to climb. So having said that, there is no problem with us going to 42 inches to do that, except that we need to raise the parapet wall 6 inches to do that. But if it's safety trumps, a height, imperceptible height difference, then we'd be glad to do that.
Alderman Bruno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm glad we at least did get to this item because I have lots of notes. These types of projects present a lot of challenges. Conflicts between neighborhood and growth. Preserving neighborhoods is good. I spent over a decade on historic preservation. I was considered one of the preservation crazies at one point. Maybe still am. But ignoring our growth needs and the demographic shift of our population is very unwise. As Alderman Maladra said, the comprehensive plan is a guideline. I interpret that as suggesting we do need density. We have to achieve our goals. We have very few opportunities to do that near downtown. But these types of projects, anytime you try and introduce that density into a community like Geneva, delivers imperfect choices. I touched on before, this is a PUD. They're not guaranteed to receive PUD designation unless they make us all happy. I think it's a great tool for us, but we can deny this for any subjective or objective reason. We can not like the aesthetics, we can not like the land use, we can think there's better and higher uses for the land. Let's see, we covered height already. Although I've looked at the plans and I've spent a lot of time considering Park Place in this, this would be perceived as much less massive than Park Place. Shadows, I did do the math. Now that it's ostensibly 2 feet shorter, that calculation would be even a little better. We've talked about property values. Neighboring properties were purchased with this being R6 zoning. I would think that value is baked into that decision as to what could be built there. Honestly, with the R7 zoning and the higher setbacks, I think that's more protective of neighboring properties than the R6 that sits there now, which could be built by right 6 feet off the line. But my biggest thing comes with highest and best use. Geneva desperately needs housing diversity. If you've studied how overweighted we are with single-family, detached, and as few opportunities we have near downtown, we need to bring in some more density and some one-story living options. Geneva would benefit greatly, in my estimation, on several levels, economically included. Geneva desperately needs some bit of affordability in our housing. This at $218 a square foot, this does not chime that bell. Actually, this project doesn't chime much of any of the bells that I look at in terms of what we need. And when I met with Mr. Hogan early on, I told him exactly that. That being said, the design I thought was, in principle, quite clever. I think private outdoor space is critical to good living. The rooftop space, I think there's some issues to be discussed, but I think that's really interesting and really clever. But I think there's more to be discussed there. The special nuisance considerations, I think, I don't know that there's really anything beyond our ordinances with nuisances on decks and existing decks and patios. Aesthetics, I think material choices could have been a little better integrated with the surroundings. I think we've got some different palettes that could be pulled from. I'm happy to have contemporary architecture. I think that's how we develop, but this seemed a little stark for me. I don't know what I meant by this last note here, but traffic study seems to indicate that this is not a problem. I've gotten very comfortable with the traffic studies and the impact of traffic on the surrounding neighborhood. But given that what I think, let me back up. And the reason I didn't vote for the zoning change wasn't because I didn't like R7. I actually think we could have a better project, a denser project, smaller units. 3,200 square feet is not what our aging community wants to move into. I fully recognize they might be hot and might sell like hotcakes today, but I think we need something different long term. For that, I would find it difficult to support the project. Thanks.
Alderman Ruby.
Thank you. Alderman Bruno, I fully agree with the high-density, affordable, and senior housing aspects, and that this project doesn't meet any of those. My questions are for the builder and/or the architect. I'm just curious if originally you tried to design this project within the R6, or I'm curious why R6 didn't work. If you can give me any specific reasons, or how different it would be in R6. And then I'll give you my other question up front too. Just, is removing the deck a possibility to look at? And I'm not sure when we would discuss that, but I'm curious if that's a possibility. I don't know how much work that is from your point of view.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to share. My name is John Green, a civil engineer with Engineering Resource Associates located in Warrenville, Illinois, and I represent the applicant. I did prepare and work with David DeGroot. We did an alternative analysis, so to speak, on what it would look like with R6 type zoning or something much more closer to R6, and he has a copy of that. It's in the record. Essentially, we showed what it was. There was a 3-unit building and a 2-unit building, and it would result in still needing a few, perhaps, fine variances, something along the lines of, like Park Place was granted to be much closer to Stevens Street because it's an 80-foot right-of-way. And actually, the pavement of Stevens Street is shifted way to the south. So there's a typical sidewalk is a foot off the lot line, whereas along our project, the sidewalk is some 12 to 14 feet out into the right-of-way. So there's a little bit more green space there than the property actually looks on paper. So we did analysis, and the sketch I prepared for staff has a 3-unit building and a 2-unit building, so the same density, and it shows a 6-foot side yard setback to the north, and then I believe a 10 or 12-foot setback to the south. So it's not in strict conformance with R6, but it's the flavor of to be consistent with the trend of that what was approved at Park Place across the street, and. So I hope that answers that question. David does have a copy of that. I don't know if it's in your packet or not. Relating to the rooftop deck, I compare it to perhaps the condo development that was mentioned in testimony to the south of here, to the north of here a little bit, to the south of our property. I mean, that's a 2, 3, 4-story building, and there's decks and patios on that. And this is This is just maybe a little larger version of that. You know, let's back up for a moment. You know, we spoke, you know what the footprints of these units are. The actual habitable, livable deck space is limited like to the back 25% of the unit, of the footprint. There's, you've seen flat roofs before. It's tar paper and there's a little slope to it. Well, there's not going to be people running all over the roofs on these. There's intentional finished flooring, like a raised wood floor, perhaps something weather resistant, that limits folks to the back 25% of these units. And there's going to be a fence. You know, if there's leaves or debris, they'll be able to get out and retract something. But this, the living space is going to be rather small and modest. It's going to be probably something similar to all of our own backyard patios. Nothing extravagant, but something limited to just the rear. With that said, the greenhouse feature on the top, and we're familiar with the greenhouse that was in a neighborhood across the street. These elevator openings and stairwell openings that we spoke of are actually constructed out of glass primarily to lessen the impact, to bring some of the character from the greenhouses across the street in terms of some continuity. And then I'll point out that these greenhouse structures are very small relative to the footprint of the building, and the greenhouses are set in at least 20 or 30 feet from the front of the building and the back of the building. So from the road, you may not even see them. So it's a flat roof with a parapet, and I believe the parapets will actually shield that greenhouse structure. So we felt, with being, you know, with nature and consistent with the comprehensive plan that the council approved by Housel Levine some years ago, there was a intentional focus on this site. I think it was the Downtown Station Area Master Plan, 2003 it was adopted, that actually specifically targeted this property as a development opportunity site. And we're doing just that. It talks about the open space and the nature, when we felt what not have something better to work with the natural terrain of the property. The property slopes some 10 or 12 feet from front to back. And more or less we comply with the building height rules if you looked at the front elevation. But in this particular part of town, your code asks us to look at the elevation along the rear as well. Well, it's that same code that caused us to need the variance for beyond height that also allows us to tuck all our two-car garages down low, kind of the basement level below ground. So the mass of our unit compared to Park Place in the front, as someone's driving down 31, is that we're a whole story shorter. And the fact the top of our parapet wall is shorter than the single-family home immediately north of us. And you have an elevation in your packet that was submitted per the request of the Plan Commission. And Dan Marshall did prepare that color rendering that just shows the scaling. One other point on the transitional setback to the north. We are providing just over 21 feet or so, but I want to note for the record that there's about a 40-foot plus separation to the home to the north. I know you did some of the shading exercises in that, but that was talked about quite a bit at Plan Commission, and we agreed, as Dan testified, that we're, in addition to the parapet that's along the north elevation, we're adding an additional railing on the inside too. There was some testimony to the fact that could people lean over, or would that be an infringement on property rights of the neighboring properties or so. So we listened to the testimony, we listened to the comments of the Plan Commission, and we made some other adjustments to some of the amenities and that are all in the record. And you know, in summary, we came back and achieved a positive 7-1 vote with the Plan Commission because we were able to work through a lot of these same issues that were discussed tonight. So I hope that answers your question.
Just one further question. So you said that you did originally draw up the plan with two buildings. So when and why did that change to one building from the original plan of two buildings?
Okay. Early on, it just it makes sense. There's some efficiencies of building one building instead of two, and we felt that because of the direction of the Housel Levine plan that we did meet with staff on a couple occasions. We did take advantage, some of the neighbors spoke about not knowing about the project. Your city process allows us to come for a conceptual review hearing. So we did not start any of this formal application process until we did go before Plan Commission, and we listened to all the Plan Commission members, and we made adjustments based on feedback. So we made some calculated steps through this process. We started this back 5 or 6 months ago. We're here today, so I hope that helps. Sure.
Thank you. Anyone else from the dais? Anyone else wish to speak to this? Item C. Okay, we have a motion and a second before us.
Can I just add one thing?
Please do.
I just wanted to, I thank the chairman for allowing me to comment. The chairman and I corresponded over the weekend as well, just to, in terms of protocol for tonight's meeting. And if I voted no on item B, the discussion on item C would be rendered moot, and this discussion would not take place. I take heart in Mr. Etsy's comment that a win-win might be achievable. So to pull the rug out from 5 and 6 months of work and discussions with neighbors, and to take you at your word, sir, and others who have stated unequivocally, no one's opposed to development, no one's opposed to this site being developed, I have faith that perhaps we can reach consensus. But to vote no eliminates the debate on item C, and I don't think that's fair to anybody. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, I'll restate the motion in a second, and that is to consider draft ordinance granting a preliminary final plan unit development plan approval for First Street Row Home CMM Holdings LLC. Please take the roll.
Mike Bruno?
Nay.
Tara Burkhardt?
Nay.
Donald Cummings?
Nay.
Becky Ruby?
Aye.
Dean Kilburg? Craig Maladra?
Aye.
Richard Marks?
I still just have some problems with that rooftop, so, and I know that comes into the plan unit development, and I don't think we've worked around it.
G. McGowan?
Nay.
Jim Radecki?
Aye.
Robert Swanson?
Aye.
Motion fails. Thank you. Moving on to item D.
Mr. Chairman, would you kindly explain to those present what was resulted in this evening's negative vote on item C?
Why don't you go ahead and explain it?
Mr. DeGroot, I invite you to stand at the podium, please, to correct me if I am wrong. We have an unusual situation tonight, ladies and gentlemen. While item B, to approve the rezoning, has advanced to City Council for consideration on October 2nd, the preliminary planned unit development on this particular site failed. Therefore, one of two scenarios could transpire. Number one, our applicant could continue to advance item B, the zoning, for consideration by the council, knowing full well that there's an unapproved plan, or the developer could work with professional staff and regroup, as it were, to consider what your options might be. It is an unusual situation, to say the least. David, have I left anything out?
That sums it up.
In essence, folks, we've approved the zoning but said no to the project. Interesting. So,
Sure is.
now who needs water? Anybody else still needs thirsty?
Thank you for the clarification, Mayor. We'll move on to D. Consider approval of site plan amendment for Wendy's Restaurant at 200 North Kirk Road, Sarin Restaurants, Inc. We have a motion, please. Moved by McGowan. Second? Second. Second by Cummings. Any comments? Comments from the dais? Any comments from the audience? Hearing none, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item E, consider request from WBK Engineering to approve a contract addendum for engineering design/specifications and IEPA permitting for Richards and Stevens Streets reconstruction in the amount of $7,952.25. I have a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Marks.
Second.
Second by Burkhart. Comments?
I think I have a question for, is Mr. Babica here? I guess I would address it to you.
I just want to say thank you all. Really appreciate your consideration. Thank you very much.
little slow there. Got a little
That's
stiff
okay.
sitting in that chair. Next year's budget should have chairs for the.
It's not my building, it's not my budget.
You know, when we passed this contract originally, it was a not to exceed contract. Is that correct?
Correct, that's why we're bringing the matter before you tonight.
And did the city ask for additional work on this, or how did we get that we've got a change order kind of coming forward with additional fees? Was it something that we didn't put in the RFP? I guess I'm just trying to understand what.
Staff does not believe so.
Okay.
We felt that the RFP that was issued, as well as the contract that was agreed to by the city council, adequately covered the needs and desires of the engineering for that, for this project. I have with me tonight Greg Chismark, one of the principal partners from Wilsberg, Kelsey and Associates. We have a slightly different point of view on that one. And after discussing this matter with the consultants, they had basically asked to make a direct appeal to the city council. And we have an extremely lengthy relationship with this consulting firm. And we thought it'd be prudent for them to have the opportunity to make their appeal directly to the city council. So with the chair's permission,
Yeah.
I would like to cede my time to Greg Chismark.
Please do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Chairman, council members, my name is Greg Chismark. I'm a civil engineer, municipal practice principal at WBK Engineering. As Rich stated, we are a Fox Valley civil engineering firm. We've got a long relationship with the city of Geneva for decades. I personally have worked with the city of Geneva staff way back to the John Edelbeck days. For those of you who remember John Edelbeck, so that goes way back, as well as working both with Rich and Brian prior to being here in Geneva. So again, there's some relationships. I know you don't know me necessarily, but in the engineering community, we know each other. Thank you. I appreciate the time. It's been a long meeting tonight for all of you. A couple things. I don't know if I should ask for questions or just begin to answer those. Let me give you the overview of how I see it. And I'll begin to answer, though, the question you had asked about the RFQ. And I think there's a differentiation between the scope of the contract, the not to exceed amount in the contract. So we have a contract with the city that's an hourly basis, not to exceed a certain amount, has a defined scope. The RFQ is a different process altogether. And I'll say, in my opinion and based on my experience, it's nearly impossible that all RFQs are going to get the scope of the project right all the time. There are going to be things you run into, especially in a project where you're working on old infrastructure in an old neighborhood. It's like working on an old house. You're going to run into things that you're going to want to do and change. And so in WBK's opinion, we believe that's what happened in this case. And we're fairly confident that if you looked at the scope of what our contract was, that with the city council and what we actually, the service we provided, we went outside that scope of services. Now, we did that at the request, again, in our opinion, from the city staff to do that. And I just want to give a little bit of the basis for that, because obviously that really puts us in an untenuous position in terms of doing this work without coming to you all for approval on that. A real quick timeline, if I could. So our contract was basically approved on March 6th. We had our kickoff meeting on March 7th. The deliverable for pre-final plans were due on April 25th. That's a 7-week time frame. We had 2 weeks to get the survey done and get those pre-final plans in the city staff so they could be bid out in May. And that was a very tight time frame. Within that process, as we are putting the plans together, again, there were these items that came out, and it's not atypical as you run across things that there'll be a minor out-of-scope item here or there, and generally we don't identify all of those. These amounted to a situation where we we got so out of whack with the original scope that it resulted in this extra amount.
We became aware of this idea that we would go over budget about 3/4 of the way through the process and through the budget. Had contacted city staff, and they said, look, your responsibility is come to city council and get approval for these extras if you believe that's the case. We were about 2 weeks away from our deliverable. So at that point, we made a judgment that we're going to deliver the project. We're at risk, but we're going to deliver a project, do what we think needs to be done, and then come ask basically before you tonight. And maybe I'll hesitate with that, again, going into and see if there's other questions in terms of what we did.
I guess I have a question for you. How many contracts of this nature have you had with the city over the years, would you say? Just a guess.
I would say a dozen.
A dozen. In contracts in general, you probably have had dozens and dozens with other municipalities too.
Yes.
Does the reverse ever happen where you're paid too much for a job and that you discover that maybe it included more?
The reverse.
And have you ever refunded that money to a municipality if the reverse happens?
The reverse does happen. Sometimes we don't hit the cap. There's an hourly not to exceed and we leave money. It's less than what the contract value is. So yes, it does happen. In fact, that's our goal. Our goal is to make everybody look good in the end and that we don't spend the money. So
How often would you say that happens?
How often does that happen?
The opposite.
I don't know if I can give you an accurate answer.
On the 12 times with the city?
Out of the 12 times with the city?
Have you ever refunded any money to the city on a contract?
Again, it's not, I wouldn't call it a refund of money. I would say that we've not reached the contract value and left money out on the PO. I couldn't accurately answer that over the years.
Fine, thank you. You probably still had the floor, I'm sorry.
Microphone, Rich?
Yeah.
So where do you think it went out of the scope, I guess, is what I haven't, if you could just give us a brief. I know
Sure.
I'm not an engineer, so.
No, and I think there's three general areas that we identified as we looked at it. Where did the scope go out of the boundaries of the original contract? One, the Burgess Norton facility was a challenge in terms of the utilities that existed, the knowledge of the utilities that existed, if you can imagine, before any survey work is done, and as we started that. So the Burgess Norton facility, in terms of utilities and the parking adjacent to the facility on both Richards and Stevens Streets, were elements that were not included in our original man-hour estimates. And so those elements, the redesign of those elements were included. The water main scope on Richards Street, we planned on replacing the water main on Stevens. On Richards Streets, we did not anticipate a full replacement of the water main. The design is for a full replacement of the water main. And then the third one is the sanitary sewer and the storm sewer scope also expanded I'm going to try and explain this. As we lay out where the utilities are going to go, they get adjacent to other existing utilities, and then sometimes the decision is made at that point, well, gee, we're doing this work, it makes sense to replace it, or perhaps the sewer line is televised and it says, we're not going to replace it because it's too expensive, staff will make that decision, and so those scope changes are made kind of on the fly. Again, we had a very tight time frame, so these things were happening very quickly. I do want to say one thing. I know, although we disagreed, Elton did a tremendous job helping us. We had a tight time frame, so every time we had a question, he answered it right away. So again, I just want to kind of compliment staff on keeping us as efficient as possible.
Alderman McGowan, or Rich, are you finished, Alderman McGowan? Or Rich, do you have something to add?
I just want to clarify, Elton is Elton Orozco, one of our engineers for the department, in case someone here didn't catch that.
I think everybody knows that. Alderman McGowan?
Yes, I do know Elton as well. You said your first name is Greg?
Greg.
Greg, okay. Were the engineers on the work sites in constant communication with the city of Geneva? Like when they got to a situation where they could see right away, like, oh, we're gonna have to do a little extra work here that wasn't necessarily talked about, let me get on the radio and talk to Elton, who can talk to Rich, and just let him know, like a heads up. Was that taking place?
So the engineers who were working on it, and again, the time frame, the engineers who were working directly on it, it really was my responsibility to monitor the budget. So I'm going to say it's not even, those folks that were working with Elton, weren't necessarily in direct communication. So it was really my responsibility. And again, as some of these scope items changed, there were items I recognized in the beginning were out of scope, but I had a $67,000 contract. So last thing I wanted to go to Rich and Brian and say week one, hey guys, I've got this little out of scope item. It would sound like I'm nickel and diming them, as well as from my perspective, my goal is to complete it. Is basically to have our staff put in whatever time it took to complete it, and there were just too many changes for us to do that in this case.
What would be the typical contingency that you build into a contract of this scope? 10%?
You know, it's interesting. I was asked the same question by someone at the City of DeKalb as I was representing the city, not the consultant in that case. There is not. It's a man-hour estimate. As you know, your RFP process is based on qualifications, but also price. And so because of that, if we built in contingencies, we would probably not get work. So basically, we put in a realistic man-hour estimate that's pretty tight because we understand it's a competitive process. So we don't. Now, that being said, there are some scope items. The scope is adjustable up and down. I mean, there are some scope items that increases our work and some scope items that can decrease it. And the hope is that over the course of the contract, that'll balance out. I think this one there was enough going on that it again, just put us over the contract value.
Are there any lessons learned from this?
Yes. I would say from my standpoint, again, it goes back to the question asked previously about the documentation. And one of the things I recognize, and it really from a staff standpoint too, and again, I understand what they have to go through on a daily basis. As I was a city engineer at one point, is I would have documented those minor changes in a constructive manner with the staff, and so they would have had a basis for it and probably communicated. Again, our invoicing comes out monthly, so in a short time frame, you know, we had a couple, 3 invoices for the project. It's hard to catch things on it, but been more on top of the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Swanson?
My question is, you obviously have done this many times. You know what a not to exceed contract is, and you know that there's a qualifier in here that if you're going to go over, you need approval before you do the work.
Yes.
My question would be, were all of these changes documented to you by city staff? Do you have anything that you can say, okay, we were requested to do X on this date?
No, I don't have I probably have some of that, yes. But I have the final documents that shows what's done. So the water main replacement on Richard Street, the parking areas at Burgess Norton, the product, what delivered, the services we delivered, the product we delivered includes out-of-scope items.
Delivered, I
from
understand.
the contract. Do I have something from the city approving those? No.
Okay, and you did not live up to the qualification here to let us know in advance before the work was done. I understand you were tight on time, but this is the first we're hearing about it, as opposed to before the work is done, and we can approve it at that time.
Certainly before the city council, this is the first time you're hearing about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to be fair, at the time, we've got 5 weeks to complete this, to stop the process and come before you and request approval. It's not impossible, but it would have delayed the project.
Okay, understood.
Alderman Bruno?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll lead with, this is no disparagement on WBK. I believe you've done good work. I understand the position you were in, and I expect we'd be working in the future. That being said, in my line of work, I do not to exceed contracts, and I eat money once in a while. It's I come up short. Having fiduciary responsibility here, I am not unsympathetic to to your plea here. I think and I presume you've done legitimate work, your description of the work. I wouldn't know how I could justify to our residents approving better than a 10% increase in the contract, a not to exceed contract. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Alderman Cummings.
I know what way I'm leaning. One thing that hasn't been brought up that also bothers me, along with all this other stuff, this was a bid situation, right? Or no?
I don't believe it was a bid situation. It was a request for qualifications that had price as a consideration.
Was it a competitive situation?
It was a RFQ, RFP process, and it's also important and relevant to note that if you go back to the council report, that WBK was not the low bid. They were actually the third lowest bid from the bottom. So we did not, in this instance, choose the lowest proposal. We chose what we felt was the most qualified proposal that met the specifications and the qualifications that we had asked for.
Okay. The thing I'm getting at is it sends, one time doesn't set a precedent, but it does send a message to the other bidders that people say, shit, heck, why don't,
Second delay.
well, just, I'll throw a bid in and I'll run it over and these guys will turn over and pay up 12% on a project and I'll just get the bid. And I'm not saying, and now obviously that implies intent and I'm not,
Right,
but,
right, I
but there are
understand.
all sorts of variables here that are upsetting.
What I maybe can address that because I think you're all bringing up some very good questions. And I think one of the questions I ask myself as I come before you, and I don't take this lightly, I understand this is not a pleasant thing for you, it's not a pleasant thing for staff and for me, is, did we perform in an efficient and is the amount we're requesting a reasonable value? And if you look at the benchmarks we commonly use is engineering as a percentage of construction dollars, and I put that in the letter. And if you look at the value of the construction for what we designed was $1.8 to $2 million worth of work. Our design fee with the additional amount is 4%. 4% is a very low percent. 8 to 10% would be a typical design, even if you were competitive for a maintenance project, but this was not maintenance, this was a reconstruct, new utilities. 5 to 6% is what IDOT recognizes as a reasonable fee for a maintenance project. So we came in at 4%. So again, I looked at those numbers. If we were much higher and agreed, if we were at 10 or 12%, I would have to agree with the statement that, okay, is this a reasonable figure? Are we requesting a reasonable amount? And I believe we are. I think we're within the benchmark of engineering services that you would typically see.
Other questions? Rich, I have a question. You said that there were other bidders for this work, and there were two that were higher than the one that was accepted?
Yes, sir.
Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
I guess my question would be to you then, how would you feel if you were, you weren't selected as a contractor, somebody lower than you was, and then then they come before the council and we paid more money to them in essence? What would you think of a municipality that would do that? I would think that the other bidders would not take that very well.
I guess one thing I would say, and the RFQ process is not perfect. I know, and there's no perfect process, so I'm not suggesting you do something different. But the idea of scoping a project in a 3-page document and sending it out to the world and getting exact same thing back from 5 or 6 firms is not accurate. Sure. People are going to look at that different. They're going to scope it different. And so I don't know if it's fair to compare how we looked at it versus any other. It was probably close. It probably wasn't exactly the same. So That's my comment on that. I think the details of the scoping, it's not that easy to scope. I know it sounds like it is. We're replacing water main, replacing a road. It's not that easy to scope and get everything into a document. It takes a lot of time and effort to really get that correct. And so, yeah.
Alderman Maladra?
Question for you in a minute, but first question for you guys. When they ran into the need for expanded scope, did they contact you? Okay, so I'll explain why I'm asking, and maybe you can both do this. So, Greg, you said that the RFQ process is not perfect. Earlier, you said it's impossible to capture scope perfectly. So you got to go in assuming you're going to run into something, right? Stuff happens. So in that context, you need a change control process. It seems to me your change control process was, well, we just decided to go ahead unless you communicated to somebody involved with the city somewhere along the way who said go ahead. So in terms of time, cost, and quality, you chose to emphasize time and sort of like, we'll just do it and ask forgiveness later, which is not exactly a prudent change control process.
I would agree.
Especially if your experience indicates that the RFQ thing is dicey to begin with.
Lessons learned, again, the change control process could have been done better on our part.
Well, there was none. There was no change control process, in spite of the fact that RFQs are not a perfect way to go. And I guess you guys were not informed before the work was done?
We were first informed by WBK that they had gone over budget in an email, at which point in time we did some emergency triage to try to figure out exactly what that overage was. And
Right,
WBK went back and reviewed their hours and reduced it to the amount you saw before us.
Yeah.
But our first inclination, from a staff's perspective, was when we were notified by WBK that they had gone over their budget.
Right. So I think that the issue here, part of it's the exact amount, the 12% or whatever. The other part of it is, I think we need to let people know that our standard is not, go ahead and go up 12% and it'll be okay, without asking us first. So that's sort of what I'm stuck with. It's, maybe it would have taken X amount of time to get the whole city council to review it and approve it, but we've had special meetings when called for, et cetera, et cetera. So a check with these guys could have resulted in a call to that guy, and who knows where that would have gone. The problem I have is that thought didn't even cross anybody's mind. That, I think, is an issue, not just for you guys, but for us as well.
Alderman McGowan?
Thank you, Chairman Radecki. I guess this question is for you, Greg, and also for Mr. Babica. If one of the other engineering firms who submitted a bid proposal for this project had come in to do the work, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but do you think that they would have also run into these same situations and realized, okay, there's a lot more work that needs to be done in here, and it's going to also cost, it would also cost those companies the additional nearly $8,000?
Yeah, that is a tough one, because Greg Chismark, hit the nail right on the head. We were ripping up infrastructure that was put in 1934. And actually, this is even before we ripped up the infrastructure. This is basically them taking design off of no information that existed whatsoever. The best we could offer them was painting out within 3 feet where our water main was, where the sanitary was, where the storm was, where the gas was, where the AT&T ducts were. And then they take that information and extrapolate it out, and then design a street using that information to modern standards. And there's all kinds of things going on out there now. But it's, any of the engineering firms we would have selected would have been facing those same challenges. And WBK is an outstanding engineering company. They're the city's stormwater consultant. And there's a lot of abandoned infrastructure underground that you don't find until you start digging. There is a lot of challenges that the analogy is as true to that as anybody else. Once you start remodeling a house and you start tearing down walls, you find all kinds of surprises behind that lat. And that's the same thing that they encountered here. The frustrating thing from staff's perspective is that they went over budget before they told us they were even close to going to the budget. And at that point in time, our hands are tied because it was a not to exceed amount by the city council. And I do not have the authority, the city administrator does not have the legal authority to grant that change order. And when we notified WBK that the only way that they can get that additional funds is to go in front of the city council, and they had not delivered those bid documents to us, they proceeded, as Greg said, at risk. I'm not advocating for them, I'm not advocating against them, but they took the business risk to give us the documents that they promised that they would deliver. They gave us the documents that we needed to build a successful project. And now, after a substantial amount of review with Greg and his staff and myself and my staff, we've actually winnowed that number down quite a bit to where we're at today. And now Greg, on behalf of WBK, is asking for that amount after myself and my staff told them that we didn't feel that it was warranted. We felt that the contract was pretty clear. We felt that the proposal was pretty clear. But at the same time, we respect their right to be heard in front of the city council, much as any other resident. They're here tonight. Can I tell you that the design documents they provided were adequate and met our needs and met the needs of the community and met the needs of the residents? Absolutely. They're ideal, and they have really helped a rather tumultuous project stay on track. But at the same time, once they shot past their budget, there's nothing I can do for them at that point in time. And he's now here in front of you all for a decision.
Thank you. Alderman Bruno?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start with, I'm generally a very empathetic guy. Had you come to us for this amount of money, I probably would have approved it. But with that, I'd move that we call the question.
Question's been called. Take the roll, please.
Reread the...
The motion as it sits right now is consider a request from WBK Engineering to approve a contract addendum for engineering design specifications and IEPA permitting for Richards and Stevens Streets reconstruction in the amount of $7,952.25. Please take the roll.
Mike Bruno?
Nay.
Tara Burkhardt?
Nay.
Donald Cummings?
Aye.
Becky Ruby?
Can I clarify, this is just to determine whether or not we vote on this next week, correct?
If it is defeated at the committee of the whole meeting, it will not advance to the council meeting?
Right, but if I vote in favor of this, that just means that we'll officially vote on it next week.
It depends how the votes cast
Depends how it
overall.
goes.
Okay.
It needs a simple majority of 6 in order to advance
I
it.
got thrown by that last thing.
So-
Aye.
Dean Kilburg? Craig Maladra?
Nay.
Richard Marks? Jean McGowan?
Aye.
Jim Radecki?
Nay.
Robert Swanson?
Nay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fails 7-3. On to item F, consider draft resolution authorizing the mayor to consent to assignment of a pole attachment agreement with Wide Open West, or WOW, Inc., to MCI Metro.
So moved.
Second.
Metro Access Transmission Services Corporation, Verizon, dated May 4th, 2015. I have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
The motion and second. Any discussion? No. Alderman McGowan?
Thank you. So now the word Verizon comes into play. I don't remember seeing Verizon the last time that this was discussed. So it was all about, this is for fiber optics, correct? The pole?
No, ma'am.
Okay, then I'm thinking of something totally different then. What are we what is this?
Last year, Metro, Wide Open West, WOW, secured a pole attachment agreement for the city, with the city of Geneva to install trunk fiber optic on our transmission lines or within our right-of-ways. And it's fundamentally different from what we discussed last week. Trunk fiber is basically just acting as a conduit. They're just taking data from the borders of Geneva, piping it through the city of Geneva, and then pushing it out the city of Geneva at the other end. The franchise agreement that was discussed and approved last week is actually a separate fiber optic line, and then it's bringing that fiber service to the houses. So probably the analogy I would use with Wide Open West is that it's just a transmission main. And in this case, Verizon has acquired Wide Open West through a business merger, and per the terms of their contract with the city, that the transfer of those rights, I'm probably butchered that and Radovich is going to kill me on tomorrow, but that has to get approved by the city council. But the language in the contract says it shall not be unreasonably denied.
So are these two separate projects then, both involving fiber optics, both involving doing something to the existing utility poles?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Kilberg.
I know that they've buried cable in my neighborhood already.
Wide Open West?
Yes.
Yes, they did.
So what percentage is buried and what percentage can we anticipate will be overhead? Do we know anything more about this? I thought everything was going to be buried.
Wide Open West completed their work last year within the city of Geneva.
Right.
I really, to be honest with you, don't know what that percentage is. I know on East Side Drive it's underground, but it's underground under East State Street. But where there are overhead poles, they've installed their conduit cable through the overhead poles. Wide Open West is not on every pole within the city of Geneva. They are basically just transmission lines run through very strategic areas to get that flow from one point of the side of town to the other side of town. It's actually a very specific route. I can trace it out in my mind right now as I'm
So is this
at the window.
really, for instance, on East Side Drive then, was that really to facilitate servicing St. Charles then possibly?
No, again, this is just a bulk fiber transmission line. This is pure bulk data transmission with Wide Open West.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item G, consider draft resolution authorizing execution of a utility easement at 417 South River Lane.
So moved.
By Mark, second by Cummings. Any discussion? Hearing none, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now we're making progress. Item H, consider draft resolution authorizing execution of a utility easement at 1243 Brigham Way.
Second.
By McGowan, seconded by Marks. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item I, consider draft resolution authorizing execution of a contract with AMS Mechanical Systems, Inc. in an amount not to exceed, one of our favorite things, $90,350 for wastewater treatment plant primary pump and valve replacement.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Bruno, seconded by Marks. Any discussion? Any questions? Any comments? Seeing none, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item J, consider draft resolution authorizing execution of a contract with Steiner Electric in the amount not to exceed $52,000 for a standby generator at well number 8.
So moved.
Motion by Marks, seconded by McGowan.
No, I actually had a question.
But second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On which one?
Sorry. Item J.
Item J, we'll get to you in a minute. It's a motion by Marks,
Second.
seconded by Bruno. Any questions? Alderman McGowan. You're welcome.
Hello. I just wanted to ask about something that caught my eye in the packet regarding this agenda item, and that was, so tell me, why would we need this, what circumstance would cause the city to need this generator to pump water from a well?
Loss of power at any point, whether it be cyber related to any tornado comes through town, something like that.
Okay, so it's just simply loss of power. The way that it was worded, I guess my imagination started running wild,
Sure.
and I couldn't
Sure.
understand. I didn't know if it was like water related, but
No.
it's basically just power related.
Exactly.
Okay, I
Yep.
just wanted to make sure of that. Thank you.
Bob, you waited 2 hours and 45 minutes. We had to ask you a question, for God's sake. Any other questions?
here.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We're down to new business. Does anybody have any new business for the committee? Seeing none, a motion to dismiss would be in order.
So moved.
Moved by Swanson, seconded by Marks. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Good night, all.